Hi, everybody. This is Professor Calabata, and I just want to give my response to the comments that I saw you writing on the Module 2 discussion board for the comprehension questions. And so let me just get a couple of them up here on the screen that I thought were significant. Let me see. Christina Batarsa, I think is your name. I'm sorry. Again, I keep apologizing if I'm screwing up your names. Remember, if we were in a classroom together, you could tell me that I was mispronouncing your name. But okay, yeah, I saw a couple of good comments here. Question number one was asking about the article that we read by Jean Anyon, the different types of schools. And let me see. Christina. So the first question is asking whether or not it's outdated. The article was published, I believe it was 1980. So that was about 40 years ago. And I haven't had you do any research yet. We're going to do some research for essays 3 and 4. But in general, maybe you've already talked about this in high school before, and we'll talk about it a little bit more as we get into essay 3 and 4. But in general, when you do research, you want to look up sources that are probably no older than 5 to 10 years old, because so much information changes over time. You want to use more recent stuff. So that's something to think about with this article. I mean, the article is 40 years old. So is that a problem? And I saw a lot of you commenting on that. It seems like you made some pretty good comments. Let's see, Christina, you said, in my opinion, I think this is outdated, but it still makes points that are true. For example, I do think that there are different schools depending on how much your parents make, and those schools have a much better system than any other school. Although I do not think that the prices are the same. Things were a lot cheaper back then. Okay, so yeah. Those are some pretty astute observations. I think that Christina's making a good point. First of all, the numbers are totally different today. I mean, this was back in around 1980, and I don't know what you were thinking if you were reading the first like 10 paragraphs or so, where in the very beginning they take about there's about a one paragraph summary for each of the schools in the beginning. So the first 8 to 10 paragraphs, we get a brief introduction, and then we get a one paragraph summary of each school. The working class school, the middle class school, etc. And the schools, the author describes the schools by, one of the things that she talks about is the income that the parents have. So the families that have their children going to each school, how much money do they make? And if we just, for instance, look at the executive elite school, this is the elite school. Most of the fathers are top executives at major United States-based multinational corporations. They're earning $100,000 to $500,000 a year. I don't know if you know anything about the amount of money that modern corporate executives are making, but $100,000 to $500,000 a year is chump change. I mean, now there are these corporate executives at major multinational corporations. I mean, they're not just millionaires anymore, they're billionaires now. So the numbers are a lot more extreme today. And on the other end of things, for instance, with the working class school, let me see. I think it was, foundry men, pipe welders, boiler makers, construction workers, semi-skilled and unskilled assembly line workers in factories, plumbers, storeroom and stockroom workers. And this was considered working class back then. And if we go to middle class, the middle class school, women in office jobs, supervisors in industry. no, construction workers and plumbers are in the middle class school, not in the working class school. So, yes, some of the jobs and the amount of money that people make in the working class and the middle class school are significantly different. People that were working in factories, people that were working in construction, in factory workers. Back 40 years ago, it was possible for a person like that to have what is considered a middle class standard of living. They could own a home. I mean, basically, about 40 years ago, the economic circumstance that many people were living in was you could graduate from high school, and then if you wanted to go to college, you could. But you didn't necessarily have to. You could go get a job in the local factory. And the assembly line job in the local factory could pay you enough money so that you weren't going to get rich, but you could buy a home. You could probably support a family with a single income. There were going to be times that were economically difficult, but in general, that person could have what is considered today a stable middle class standard of living. And then if that person wanted to go to college, I guess basically you could get a job working in a factory right after high school, and it could give you a stable middle income standard of living. You weren't going to get rich, but you could own a home and support a family. Or you could go to college if you wanted to, but you didn't have to. But you could go to college, and then if you went to college, then you could work as a manager in the factory instead of working on the assembly line in the factory. And that economic situation, it just does not exist anymore. I don't think it does. I don't think that college is something that is just optional anymore. I think that if you want to have a stable standard of living today, you pretty much have to go to college now. And the types of jobs that would give people a stable economic standard of living back 40 years ago, like for instance, working in a factory, that's just not the case anymore. And I guess there's a whole other discussion. You could take an entire class about that. Outsourcing, factories getting shut down, how the economy has transformed over the past couple of decades. And we're not going to get into that in great detail, but I think that you don't have to know a lot of detail or do a lot of reading to understand it. I mean, you can look at these numbers and these job descriptions and the descriptions of these schools at the very beginning of this article, and you can see things have changed radically over the past 40 years. Maybe what's the pattern there? The pattern that you can see from these numbers, comparing these numbers to our own personal experience today, is that the gap between wealthy and not so wealthy people has gotten really big. Wealthy people make lots and lots and lots more money than they did 40 years ago. And people that are middle income or low income people, not only has their income not gone up, but they've kind of, slipped back in many ways. So we've had a lot more concentration of wealth in American society. A smaller number of people have gained a lot more economic wealth, and large numbers of other people live with a lot less economic stability than they did 40 years ago. So, yeah, I think that I saw those types of comments. I mean, I read Christina's answer to that question, and I thought she summed it up nicely. And I saw those types of comments in lots of other people's responses. Lots of people could see the numbers are completely different, right? So when we're looking at an article that's a couple, like 40 years old, that's something to keep an eye on. However, something else Christina said, and that I saw a number of other people say, let's see, I do think that there are different schools depending on how much your parents make, and those schools have a much better system than any other school. So yeah, so the economic situation that people live in today is very different than the situation in America when Gene Anyon was writing this 40 years ago. But the general idea of the article is still pretty accurate. which is the idea that there are different types of schools that we have in America, unfortunately, depending on the type of income that people have in any particular area. So if there's a community that has a lot of high income people living there, chances are good the schools are going to be more impressive. If there's lots of lower income people living in an area, then the schools are going to be not as impressive. And the interesting thing that Jean Anion points out is there's kind of two criteria that divide all these different types of schools. It's not just the resources that are available. So for instance, a school in a high income area is going to have a higher budget. They're going to have more access to more money to do more stuff. And the lower income school is going to have less money to operate. Sure, I think everybody knows that. But something that Jean Anion points out is that it's not just the money, the resources that each school has. It's the behavior of the people in the school that is different. So I guess the larger argument that Jean Anion is making is that schools are not just giving people knowledge and skill that they need to be successful. Schools are also conditioning people to behave a certain way. So there are different people, unfortunately, because of different life circumstances that they don't have any control over. We don't have any control over what community we're born into. Some of us are a little bit luckier and we're born into a family with a bit more wealth, and others are born into a family that has a bit less wealth. And a certain amount of stuff that we do in life is based on our own individual choices. That's true. But a lot of stuff that we have in life and a lot of options that we have are based on the circumstance that we're born into as well. And so there's those two factors, both individual choice and also life circumstance that we're born into that we don't have any control over. Those two factors kind of determine a lot of things that we do or can or cannot do in life. And the school system, in addition to being very economically divided, is also very divided based on the types of things that they teach kids in school. So the teachers are not just giving the students knowledge and skill, like I said before. The teachers are also conditioning the students to behave a certain way, so that when those students become adults, they will fulfill certain roles in the economy. So school, in other words, it's kind of a disturbing argument that she's making. Schools condition people to behave a certain way and to expect certain things out of life. So some people are conditioned to give orders, and other people are conditioned to take orders and to do what other people are telling them to do. And so you see a lot in the working class school and the middle class school. You know, these students are not just learning math, but they're learning to be obedient and to follow instructions. And on the other end of things, in the executive elite school, the students are being taught to be leaders. They're being taught to be creative, to learn how to solve problems, and they're learning how to lead and to give other people orders. So it's not just knowledge and skill that the school system is giving the students. It's conditioning them to behave a certain way. And that's both interesting and kind of scary and disturbing at the same time. I don't know what your reaction was to this article, but when I read it, I saw that my own high school was the working class school. I mean, you know, this whole thing about find the answer in the textbook, right? When I read that, I don't know what your reaction was reading this, but when I read that, I thought, oh my God, that was every single boring activity I did when I was in high school. So anyways, yeah, there are some things that are very outdated about the article, but at the same time, there are some things that are a bit more timeless and useful for us today. So let me look at something else here. The Allegory of the Cave by Plato. I wouldn't be surprised if some of you have already read this before, or if you haven't read it before, if this was your first time reading it, I wouldn't be surprised if some of you are going to run into this reading assignment again sometime in the future. It's a very popular reading assignment. Jean Dark Nasser, your answer to number 3, the meaning behind the cave is the difference between knowledge and ignorance. Let's see, yeah. As well, he tried to send a message about how the prisoner with blinding eyes and who's handcuffed has no power and suffers in the darkness, but he also ignores the truth. Okay. Besides that, he shows that the brave person who breaks the restriction and opens his mind to knowledge. The lesson also was that, okay, everyone turns from level to level. They will suffer in the beginning, but then everything will be better. So yeah, okay. So that was a pretty good response. I was happy. I got the impression that you all understood that the allegory of the cave is a metaphor. And in the PowerPoint presentation, I talked about what a metaphor is. It's something used to represent something else, a symbolic representation of something. So, okay, so when we're reading the allegory of the cave, what we want to be thinking of is what is the symbolic significance of the story. And so, yeah, I mean, it's about the path of the individual human being becoming an enlightened person. And what is that process of learning? I guess, there's different types of learning. Sometimes you might learn a skill and how to ride a bike or something. But there's some types of learning that it's not just learning a physical skill. It's a type of learning that causes you to go through a process of personal growth. You've learned something that causes you to see the world a different way. You've learned something that causes you to reevaluate yourself, to see yourself in a different way. And so it's personal growth, right? So you can look at yourself after the learning process and you can see that you are now a different person compared to the type of person you were before you went through the learning process. And so, that's really what Plato and Socrates were talking about, this process of personal growth and personal change. So, if you think about college, what do they mean when they say higher learning? What is higher learning? And I think basically this is what they're talking about. Higher learning is not just acquiring a skill to get a better job, which, it is. I mean, there's no problem. There's nothing wrong with going to college because you want to get a better job. But the term higher learning means a type of education where after the person is done with the educational process, they're not the same person afterwards that they were before they began. And so I think that's basically what you see in this person who's coming up out of the cave. And every element of the story, we can see some symbolic meaning. The chains and the darkness in the cave. There's, obvious symbolic significance of ignorance there. Coming the fire, the sun, the light. There's obvious symbolic significance of knowledge, and how the person is a different person now that they're outside the cave. It's an interesting question to ask. Why do they want to come back down into the cave and tell everybody what they saw? Why do people do that? Why is it that when we learn something, the truth of something, we feel a need to tell other people? It's an interesting question to ask. The person who comes up out of the cave, they don't have to go back into the cave to try to tell all their friends that are still in darkness about what they saw outside the cave. But they're motivated to do it. And it's interesting to ask why. It's also interesting to see the people that are still living in darkness. Why do they resist? And even in the end, it actually says they might want to kill the person who's causing them to change their way of seeing things. I think that something that Jean Dark Nasser, the something you said there is that they will suffer in the beginning, but then everything will be better. Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to understand as well. So each element of the story has a symbolic significance. And the theme, the larger lesson, is all about personal growth. And it also is intended, the story is intended to show how personal growth is not necessarily a pleasurable process. It's not pleasant. It can often be very difficult, very scary, very painful. Personal growth doesn't necessarily feel good until after you're done with it and looking back. You go through a difficult process of personal growth. It's usually not a pleasant experience. Growing hurts, and it's after the fact you look back and you can feel a sense of satisfaction. It's kind of strange when you think about it. There's a paradox there, something that contradicts. It's painful, but we want to go through the process. And after the fact, we are happy that we did it, even though while we were experiencing it, it can often be a very difficult and painful experience to suddenly be forced to see the world in a different way and to see ourselves in a different way. Although something I just said might be inaccurate. I said we want to go through it. Not everybody does. Remember, there's people in the story who stay in the cave. They don't want to come out of the cave. So lots of people are perfectly content with leaving their ideas and their state of mind exactly where it is. Anyways, let's see. Yeah, so those were a couple of the interesting comments I saw. And I'll post some more comments about the rough draft in a couple of days. So start working on the rough draft. I'll see you guys later.